Chris and company rolls on after Michigan beats Ohio State. Could you ask for anything more? I feel like I have done everything possible to milk Michigan's win against the Buckeyes, and we will continue to, as Anthony Bellino will be joining the program today. But before we jump into that, this should be a lot of fun. Let's get some programming notes out of the way. Look, first things first, I'm going to plug a lot of things, but if you want to find everything, here's what you got to do. Just go to CastellaniContent.com. CastellaniContent.com, there you will find it's a one-stop shop for everything that I create. Michigan football, basketball, videos, Lions videos, Tiger stuff, podcast episodes of I'll Say This, and Chris and company can all be found there. Website looks beautiful. I wish I could take credit for designing it, but I can't, but it looks fantastic. Go there. You'll find everything. If you want to just follow me on Twitter, you can. That's at Castellani2014. We're on TikTok as well at Chris Castellani, Instagram, Chris Castle95. But if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We really want to get the YouTube numbers up. I feel like these can improve, and the clips are doing very well on TikTok and everything, and I appreciate it. But, YouTube, we got about 4,500 subscribers. Let's try to bump those numbers up. So if you not only subscribe, you can click the bell notification. That way you are notified every time that I upload a video to this beautiful site that is YouTube. So yeah, Anthony Bellino, if you don't know the face, you definitely know the voice, though. I think if you've been around the state of Michigan and you know sports or sports radio, you've seen this guy before. Really good discussion covering all things, all the hot topics here in Michigan, starting off with Michigan's upset win over the Buckeyes. So yeah, let's jump right into it. Anthony Bellino, interview time. Chris and company rolls on, this time following another, so glad to be able to say that, Michigan-Ohio State victory. We are joined today by friend of the program, co-host of the Sports Wrap with Lomas Brown. You've seen him at Chrysler Center. You've seen him at the Big House. You've seen him at Ford Field. Anthony Bellino joining the program. Anthony, what's up, buddy?
Chris, my friend, man, first and foremost, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I got the text from you, and I was just as excited as you were about the outcome there in Columbus on Saturday. So, man, life is good. It's busy right now, but busy's good.
I can imagine, and that's where we'll start with the game, because I've had a weird experience with this where for so much of my life, it was that last weekend of the college football season was just misery. I mean, I really started watching sports in 2003, so I saw Michigan win that game in 2003 with Chris Perry and John Navarre and Braylon Edwards. And then they won the year that Fickell was at Ohio State as the interim coach. But for so long, kind of forgot what it was like. And I've made this joke a million times, but it's not even my second favorite thing. Like, my favorite thing is beating Ohio State in football. It is. And I guess from your standpoint, as somebody who, dips their toes into so many different ponds when it comes to sports, do you kind of feel the same way? I mean, is there anything like, it's almost like a religious experience, in my opinion, to be able to win this game? What's it like for you on a yearly basis now?
Hey, Chris, for me, when I went to college in Bowling Green State University, I was surrounded by so many Buckeyes because everybody in the state of Ohio rallies around Ohio State. Whether you're a Bengals fan or a Browns fan, it's the Reds or it's the Guardians, whatever your professional sort of allegiance is to, everybody is in on the Buckeyes. And so I got hammered with Ohio State for so long that now it's almost like cathartic. Like, I had some guys that did answer the phone as I made my rounds on Saturday, because I made my rounds for the fourth consecutive year. And some guys, they refused to answer anything. Not a text, not a call, not an Instagram DM. I think one of my buddies actually blocked me. So, it happens. I guess maybe we'll get unblocked at some point. Yeah. But it is, it's cathartic for me because of what I had to endure going to school in Ohio during the prime years of, Jim Tressel, and then, hearing about the Urban Meyer, and they always let me know every single year at the end of the season who won the game. So now it's like retribution. And the fact that they were able to win that game with all the circumstances, which I'm sure we'll dive into, it is, to say it was religious, I actually kind of think that is kind of, you had a wing and a prayer, right? You had to roll the ball out because at 6-5, going down to the shoe, spending $20 million on their roster. They bring in Chip Kelly, who was a coach that was near a national championship at one point in his career and decided to leave the head coaching position to go be an offensive coordinator for you. All the talk from Ryan Day, the skull session before the game. I mean, the whole thing, it was pure bliss from a Michigan standpoint.
Coming into the game, where was your mindset at? Because I remember on Saturday, right before kickoff, thinking, I should feel worse about this. I should feel like we're coming into what's going to be a coronation, Ohio State's like revenge tour, so to speak, of this. But I remember coming in saying, well, it's been such a disappointing year up to this point that it's kind of like winging a prayer is a perfect way to put it. Like you're playing with house money, right? If you win this game, it throws everything out of whack for them. Their entire season is a failure, essentially, at this point. Where was your head at coming into the game? Did you feel like they had a better chance than some people were giving them, or were you pretty pessimistic too?
I kind of felt like it would, you'd need a little bit of luck. You'd need a couple of bounces because we hadn't done enough offensively all season long for me to believe otherwise until we flipped Bryce Underwood and put 50 on Northwestern.
Right.
So, my job at Michigan is as the in-game host. So I stand on the sidelines. You really, when people ask like, oh man, how did they get 50 points? I'm like, I have no idea. I had to go rewatch the game to figure out how they were able to put up 50. And it kind of felt like, okay, there's a little bit of momentum there offensively. The defense will have to worry about the injuries and then the no Colson Loveland thing. That was going to be a problem. How are we going to operate without him? But I actually felt really good. And the reason I felt really good is because we were playing with nothing to lose.
Right.
Our season was already basically over. We're bowl eligible and whatever. Any Michigan fan, you can debate whether or not you want whatever you want to do there. But we were playing, as you said, with house money. And that gave us the advantage because all the pressure was on Ohio State because there's no way they could lose that game on Saturday. Not as 19.5-point favorites, not at home, not when Michigan's at their worst. Now look at us now.
Yeah. I never go the disrespect route just because I think it's easy. But when I saw a 19.5-point spread, I'm like, dude, man, I'd be hammering that Michigan's going to cover that. Like, I just said that to me was very surprising in this rivalry. And I understand it. And that was the thing. I'm glad you brought up the Northwestern game because for 10 games, I saw a certain version of this team. And there was just this, and not to say Northwestern's some power, but there was this little light that I saw in that game where it's like, man, this offense putting up 50. Okay, all of a sudden there might be something. And I think that something was really, we finally saw an offensive line that was kind of able to wear teams down as they did in the fourth quarter against Ohio State. So, yeah, look, amazing game. It's been dissected a million times and understandably so. It's one of the more shocking games in the history of this rivalry. But I guess from a broader standpoint, looking at the bigger picture, how do you assess this season? Because the one thing I said in my video after is like, whatever criticisms you had of this team through 11 games, they're still there. Like, you're not wrong for saying like, staff was underwhelming or players underperformed or there were quarterback issues, but the blow is softened so much with this game that you view it in a weird way as a borderline successful season because you beat your rivals. You won the one game that everyone, hones in on. What's your kind of assessment of year one under Sharon Moore?
I mean, so let's use Wink Martindale for an example, who was, just shredded by the fan base. People were upset and rightfully so. And whether this is a testament to Wink or Ryan Day's stubbornness because Jim Harbaugh has ingrained it into his mind that your team was soft, right? And that was the whole talk, is that our offensive line can dominate the line of scrimmage, which proves that your team doesn't have the toughness in the trenches where it matters the most. Because you look at that last drive from the from the second quarter by Ohio State, they went 9 plays in about a minute and 45 seconds and scored a touchdown. But they refused to use their best weapons. It was really, in part of that, credit Wink Martindale. And I feel like a lot of the suspicions that we had, a lot of the criticisms that we had, for me, it kind of goes out the window because you won that game. And I have to bring in Bryce Underwood with this as well, because when you flip him and then you win this game, and now you're starting to see more and more recruits starting to flip over too, because I think we all assume that after a majority of your coaching staff is depleted with Jim Harbaugh leaving for the NFL, look at the 13 guys that were drafted. Like, that's just way, way, way too much. Sure, Alabama had turnover, but they never had turnover with Nick Saban, right? Nick Saban was always the constant. And now look at the year that they're having without him. It's not a terrible year, but it's not an Alabama year. It's not what we're accustomed to. So I expected this year to be a little underwhelming and for us to have some serious growing pains. But I think it kind of goes out the window over the last 2-3 weeks.
It's surprising that we've gotten to that point. I'm glad you brought up Wink because I had a phone call after the game with my friend Anthony Broom, who writes for the Wolverine.
Oh, I love that guy.
He's the best. He's the best.
Sure.
Yeah, and he brought up the point of, this was almost the first game where you kind of could properly judge Martindale in the sense that all season this team was unable to play complementary football. Last year's defense was incredible. I think it's one of the best defenses we've ever seen in college football, at least recent college football. But that offense also did a tremendous job of sustaining drives, keeping them off the field and keeping them fresh. With the number of short fields the defense was given, short drives, 3 and outs, early turnovers, it seemed like they were often rarely ever able to get comfortable. They were super comfortable on Saturday, and they played into Michigan's game. I mean, running into that front seven was never going to work. It was it was startling. The Bryce Underwood news, you've mentioned that, and that's obviously taken center stage, and understandably so. I mean, a huge moment, not just for the future here, but I feel like in terms of just Michigan really entering the new era of college football, where paying $12 million for a quarterback is going to be a thing. To me, it seemed as though he was pretty set on LSU, even I think a week before committing to Michigan. There were posts on Instagram and everything. Did you have any inclination that the tide was starting to turn internally regarding his potential commitment, or were you as surprised as everybody else?
I knew that there was some excitement a couple days before where it was like, hey, wait a minute, now we have a real chance at this kid. But I don't really dive into a lot of the high school recruiting because they're young men, and at this rate with the transfer portal, the way that it operates right now, it's a revolving door. So you could be excited about somebody today and, have to eat your own words, next season when they decide that, hey, I'm going to go somewhere else. My time here is over. So I try not to dabble too much, but I think Bryce as a player is one thing. What you mentioned, that commitment of that money where Michigan is now entering, you start to look at the Michigan alumni base, and then, Larry Ellison comes out of the woodwork because of, a significant other, which is a phenomenal story all in itself.
Yeah.
And I've read some Buckeye blogs where they're really deep in the rabbit hole on that. But, you look at what the Dodgers are doing. Look at what the Yankees are doing. Why can't Michigan football now go ahead and just do that? Because that pocket is pretty deep right there. And I think that should be very, very scary for the rest of college football, because it's always been haves versus have-nots. But typically that was facilities, right? Typically that was tradition. Now with the NIL game, the way that it is, this uncontrollable free agency with no salary cap, you're really looking at, there's a lot of programs across the country that were kind of middle of the pack. I'll use Wisconsin, for example. If Wisconsin doesn't figure it out and figure it out fast, that's a program that could be in trouble. So to see Michigan commit the funds that they did is a great sign for Michigan fans everywhere.
I think what we saw in the last few years, and this might change with conference expansion, was there was no middle class in the Big Ten anymore. It was Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. And then after that, people complained about Michigan's schedule so much last year. And my kind of counterpoint was maybe the Big Ten should just be better. I can't really knock these other teams when Michigan's kind of boat racing them. The point that you made about Dodgers, Yankees, and I've made that point a million times. I'm glad you mentioned it, is I do feel bad because NIL has become free agency, and it's baseball free agency, which is not exactly, in my opinion, what it was supposed to initially be. But we're lucky in the sense that we root for a big market team. And Michigan is now committed to being a big market team. And, that they're going to spend that way. It makes it more exciting, but I do understand the counter argument to it. I guess as somebody who's kind of been around for a minute, do you think at some point there will be sanctions on NIL that you will only be allowed to spend a certain amount of money on players, on teams, or do you feel like this kind of Wild West format that they have is going to continue?
The Wild West format has to come to a close
Yes.
Because it's not sustainable and it's not right. And I think that when you touch on the middle class of college football, that's where the soul of college football really dies. It can't just be a one-game season. There's a lot of programs out there. I spent a lot of time, a decade plus, working for the University of Toledo in the Mid-American Conference. I went to a MAC school, right? In the level of ability to compete now, it really hurts. And you start to look at basketball and you're like, holy smokes, you have a good year in the MAC. back and boom, you go right to the Big 12 or the Big 10 or what have you. But I think, and I might be a radical because I am a traditionalist, I do see the value of walking out of college with your education paid for. I do see the value in what it costs to feed a team, to travel for a team, to put them up in the hotels, the gear. And then I like to also reference all the benefits of being a college athlete on campus that can't be quantified in dollars and cents on a Saturday night, if you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying,
I
Chris.
feel it. Yeah, you're right. Yes.
However, I think that the best thing that football and men's basketball can do is collectively bargain. I really
Yeah.
do. I think they need to split. They need to split off from the athletic department in its entirety. College athletics, as we once knew it, is gone, and we need to catch up with. This is now minor league sports, and how does the NBA, how do the NFL, how do they, have any sort of impact on this? Because I would like to see kids stay in college longer for basketball, but that's another story for another day. But I think that the collectively bargained agreement, players are now employees, a salary cap is in place, and then we can function on more of a level playing field where we can't get a call, even though we benefit from it, from Larry Ellison to say, "Hey, here's your 10 million."
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways this current era has to happen just because it will lead to kind of it's trial and error session of being like, okay, what's working, what's not. And you mentioned being a traditionalist, and I think most people, like at least that I talk to, kind of fall somewhere in the middle where I do totally understand players wanting to make money off their name, image, and likeness, and you can love college football and everything that comes with it, and still acknowledge like some of this is a bit crazy. Like this, I mean, I remember, Keon Sabb winning the national championship at Michigan, then transferring to Bama. Like to me, that's just like, what are we doing here? Like one of the great things, and I've heard this brought up before, but I think Michigan's national championship team last year in a lot of ways will be remembered more fondly than people think, because a lot of those guys came in together. A lot of those guys graduated together. You had fifth, even sixth year seniors with the COVID year in some instances. Yeah, you had a few transfer portal guys mixed in, but I feel like we're rarely ever going to see another team that had that many guys who got to know each other over a 4 or 5 year stretch the way that team did. So obviously Michigan now going on to whatever bowl game it's going to be. I mean, I think fans have now adjusted with the players where, like, I mean, I'm not a betting man necessarily, but I would imagine that we're going to be probably without Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, a lot of key pieces there. Totally understandable at this point. I mean, I was brought it up to Anthony, which is the last few years we have not had to worry about these bowls. The last few years it's been Miami, it's been Pasadena, it's been Houston. Bit of a different time here, so to speak. But I want to you brought up college basketball just a second ago, and I want to transition to that because Michigan, as the time people listen to this, will have played a game against Wisconsin at the Kohl Center. We'll see what happens. I'm not going to say pleasantly surprised with what Dusty May's done so far, but I'll just say happy because I liked the hire a lot. I figured he comes in with a pedigree. He took a team to a Final Four. The guy busted his ass in the portal in the offseason. I mean, they completely built a team through the portal with a roster that makes a lot of sense. I talked to Tony Garcia, who covers Michigan for the Free Press several months ago, and he just mentioned the fact that in the last few years under Juwan, I mean, you had guys that were playing out of position. The roster construction didn't make a lot of sense. Here, I feel like he definitely has the team that he wants. What have you seen so far from Dusty May's unit that kind of inspires a lot of hope?
First off, when you mention guys playing in the right spot, the guard play, I mean, look at the improvement. I know it's a very small sample size, but look at Namari Burnett from last year to this year. They have done a masterful job, and he has as well, bringing in Trey Donaldson, Roddy Gale. I had one of my buddies tell me that he wants to name his next child Trey Gale after Trey and Roddy. So, I mean, I mean, whatever. But then you bring in Vlad Golden, who at 7'1", I think that right now we see it from time to time where he realizes that he's 7'1". I think that other times he's kind of anticipating contact, which is throwing him off in the paint a little bit. Danny Wolf, very high IQ player. Now, I don't say this to try to downplay any of the turnovers because he's averaging he's way up there in the college ranks as far as like 5 turnovers a game, and that's way too high for an individual. But he's making some plays early this season that guys weren't ready for the ball because he's seen something like you can't throw a bounce pass from the top of the key to a guy who's cutting corner to corner when he's just trying to respace the floor and reset it. But Danny saw it, threw it, and it becomes a steal and a turnover there. Dusty May has been able to build a team that is so complementary. And sure, do they play fast? Yes. When you play fast, you're going to have turnovers. But they also have the ability to shoot, and they can shoot the
Mhm.
stuff out of that
Yeah.
basketball, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so when you look at that, that can erase some of the turnovers because everybody can shoot it. And then you get a guy like Will Cheddar. You talk about the transfer portal. I mean, Will Cheddar, I'm ready to build a statue of this guy.
Yeah,
I don't know
man.
if it's like a little statue or if it's going to be a 30-foot statue we just put next to the Gordie Howe Bridge. I'm not really sure. But either way, because Will Cheddar has been through a lot,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And he could have gone other places and played, but he decided to stay. And he is the guy exactly what you need personality wise to come in off the bench and make sure that you don't take a dip. He can shoot it. He can put it on the floor. He's not afraid. I mean, he went air Cheddar the other night
Mhm.
and dunked from like the second hash mark. It was incredible,
Mhm.
but then also brings that defensive intensity. And that's what this team does. Everybody's getting on the floor. Everybody's defending. Everybody rebounds. And that's something we just didn't see during the Juwan era that was really disappointing.
This bench, I mean this as a positive, is going to annoy a lot of people, and their depth
Oh,
is
yeah.
going to annoy a lot of people. Because I one guy that I can imagine opposing teams, especially in the Big Ten, getting sick of is going to be Sam Walters. Because he's going to be a guy similar to, now he won't be the defender that this guy was, but Chauncey Brown in the COVID year, when he would come off the bench and just go 3 for 3 from three, or that same corner three shot every single time. I think that the depth that they've built to be able to do that in the portal is wildly impressive. From your vantage point, I guess you mentioned some of it already, but what are the differences in culture, I guess, that you've seen so far compared to where this team was a year or two ago versus now?
I think that the word I would use to describe would be radical.
Wow.
It's a radical difference. The overall level of buy-in, I felt like the last 2 years, and I'm not trying to throw shade or slight anybody, but I just felt like, we would show up to work and we knew that, I can't feel as an employee or as a fan that I care more about the outcome of the game than the guys that are out there on the floor.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times, that's how fans feel. A lot of times, that's how a lot of pro sports fans feel. Like when their teams are bad, they feel like they care more about the outcome of the game than the actual guys on the field, and that really hurts. So I feel like from a cultural standpoint, overall level of buy-in, just watch the way they defend, but not just the way they defend. If the camera pans close enough, these guys are always talking to each other.
Yeah.
They're always communicating, and I love that, especially when you think about having to go to the transfer portal, rebuild an entire roster, and get these guys on the same page. Sure, they've had some like a little bump here and there where they miss a coverage, it's a bad pass, someone's not expecting something. You got a great no-look bounce pass from Danny Wolf that they thought he was taking it to the cup to lay it in, but he decided to pass instead. You're going to have issues like that, but these guys play really well together, and it seems like they're playing for one another, and that is crucial as we begin the faux Big Ten play, where we're just going to play a couple games,
Yeah.
then get back into non-conference, then we'll come back and play the real conference.
Yeah, Michigan's got an interesting little stretch coming up. Obviously they'll play Wisconsin tonight. They have Arkansas coming up in a game. I think that's at Madison Square Garden. So that I like the non-conference schedule they have, where they have been tested a few times already. I thought they played great in Fort Myers. Every post-game speech that you see of Dusty May, he brings up camaraderie, being good teammates, getting to know each other, and communication. I think that is the hardest thing to do. You alluded to it already with a team full of guys from the portal. And that's why college basketball, more so than ever, is harder to predict than ever, because you just don't know how these guys are going to gel when it's their first year often playing with each other. So I think that's a big step in the right direction. The fact that we've seen these guys really communicate. I think the defensive energy, you talk about radical, I mean, night and day compared to what we saw a year ago. It really is positive to see. And I like talking about this stuff because I love Michigan basketball. Like, I legitimately, and I had Nick Baumgartner on a few weeks ago. It's like, for a time, quite a long time, some of my memories as a sports fan, as a Michigan fan, like the basketball ones were greater than the football ones. I mean, you see Trey Burke behind me right here, 2 runs to the national championship. I contend, and it frustrates me because I understand the money and the history and everything that comes with it. But I always say, look, I think this has the potential, and I've seen it be a great basketball program. And every time they take a step back, I feel like people try to bury them. Do you feel like to a certain extent Michigan as a basketball school is somewhat underappreciated?
Oh, 100%. I'll
Yeah.
take you back what John Beeline's, I think it was his last year.
Mhm.
We had back-to-back games in which we played North Carolina and Purdue.
Yeah.
And those were two of the greatest atmospheres in sports that I've ever been a part of. We're talking sold out Chrysler. Place was louder than hell. Jaden Ivey was running up and down the floor dunking the basketball. Oh, he was a pain. But it can be Chrysler's it's just the perfect size arena. And
Mhm.
when people decide that they want to buy into Michigan basketball the way that they do football, why can't we have both? There's no written
Mhm.
rule, Chris, that we
I
can't be
know.
good at both at the same time, Chris.
Yeah.
This can happen. So for me, I look at, the tradition that's there. I look at the history that is there as far as being able to put a winning product out there. Some of the great athletes that have come through that program. I mean, look at the terror that Franz Wagner's on
I know,
right
right?
now down there with the Orlando Michigan Magic. I mean, those guys. Franz is leading the charge. I mean, he's been sensational.
Mhm.
There's no reason that Michigan basketball can't be as prominent for the fans as football is once football concludes. And to Dusty May. Dusty May is a guy that early on, really, I was taken back by
Mhm.
how he gets it. And what I mean by that is when you are a basketball coach, when you're a football coach, that's not just your only job. You are now an ambassador for the entire athletic program. And Dusty May has been more than willing to go and do everything. We called him for a Michigan Alumni Association tailgate. And it was like, yeah, I'll come over. I'll
Mhm.
I'll do this. I'll do that. And all of that stuff matters. And going back to the Bryce thing, I mean, in the post-game presser after
Yeah, I was gonna
Michigan
bring that up.
wins,
Yeah.
he goes, I don't want to commit a secondary violation, but what a great day for the
Yeah.
university. Like he understands the impact that he can have as a coach. And I think that's very, very important.
When he did that, I'm like, man, he's you've made it as a Michigan man when you're getting asked that question, and you're deflecting and being like, man, I don't want to mess this up at all. I thought that was really a great moment. Yeah, no, he brings tremendous energy as a coach, and I think that it's especially in the modern age of college basketball. And we've seen it. Some guys like Jay Wright and Tony Bennett who've kind of said like it is a bigger job than it's ever been because not only are you bringing in players and developing players, you've got to keep players happy. There's money involved. There's portal. There's NIL, and I think that he's the perfect modern coach for Michigan. I guess what was weird is in the early part of the 2000s, really into the late 2000s, there were those questions about like how serious is Michigan with basketball because they had the sanctions following the Weber stuff. You fire Amaker. Chrysler was not in a very good spot, and that's where, as much maligned as he was, I do give Dave Brandon a lot of credit. Like they completely revamped Chrysler into a top tier facility, and then what we learned, and some people might have known it at the time, but it took a while for us to learn, is they had probably one of the 5 to 10 best tacticians in college basketball for a decade plus in John Beilein. And all of a sudden, I mean, in terms of player development, you could argue there wasn't anybody better because the guy who's behind me here, Trey Burke, was a 3-star recruit that committed to Penn State and became National Player of the Year. I mean, some of these guys that were, Karis LeVert was going to Ohio to play for John Gross. He ends up being, a really solid NBA player. Then it just kind of snowballed after that. And I think even with the steps back that they've taken, there's still a lot of excitement. With the North Carolina game from 2019, I'm glad you mentioned that because one of my next questions was going to be, what's the loudest you've ever heard Chrysler Center?
Probably Purdue and UNC in those back-to-back
Yeah.
games because it felt like we were riding such a wave right there of success. And I, if I'm not mistaken, I think we win both of those games.
Yeah, they did.
It was just like to the point where the music's blasting, the fans are yelling, the official score is probably 3 seats from me, and I can't hear a word he's saying. I can't hear myself think. And those are the atmospheres, the types of games, the student section, the Maze Rage, they're on their feet. Like you look at the Cameron Crazies, you look around the country and you see some of these, these very impactful student sections and fan bases. And it's like, man, we've had that. Can we get that back? Can we get to the point where Chrysler Center is the go-to ticket now that football is over?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And it's funny because with you and how I've known you is my introduction to you is through The Voice because when you were doing the PA guy at Chrysler, then obviously I kind of came to know you as a person. I've seen you at Brighouse, I've seen you at Ford Field and everything. It's on a personal level. Was there a certain moment? I'm always curious about this with people with great voices. Was there a certain point in your life when you realized like my voice is probably going to play? Like this is something that people want to hear this?
I don't know how to say this without people like maybe looking at me cross-eyed, but I'll be 100% honest with you because I woke up this morning and I was trying to talk and I was like, man, this is weird. I can't stand my own voice.
I get it.
I rarely listen back to anything that I've ever done. It's just one of those things where, there were some opportunities there to do some different things. Like I started as a freshman doing women's soccer games at Bowling Green State University, and I just called it like I would see like you know, English Premier League soccer. Like
Mhm.
I went all out and they were like, hey, you want to do more? Like, do you want to do baseball? Do you want to do softball? We have a tennis match. Like, sure, if you're gonna pay me $35, I'm gonna show up and do this. Like that's beer money. Here we go.
Mhm.
But no, it's really been, it's part passion, part opportunity, and you know that half of the people are going to love you, half of the people are going to hate you, and half of them don't care, right? So you do the math on that, you really start to figure out that the other part of it is I never want it to ever be about me.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the most sincere way. Like the game should be called where if you have fun with it, if you enjoy the 3-point call, great. If you hate it, that's okay too. Especially if you're an Ohio State fan, hate it all you want. Can't wait till you guys come to Chrysler if you're on the schedule
Mhm.
this year. Haven't
Yeah.
gotten that far, but really, you're a part of the game that can have an influence, but don't overdo it to the point where you think that it's about you because it's
Mhm.
not. It's about the team. It's about the players. They just happen to need this service. That's the service you provide.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing when it comes to the entertainment industry like that. And you hear that all the time. Like there's actors who never watch their own movies just because they've been so a part of the process that when they try to go back and watch it live, it's like they see all the imperfections that maybe some other people might not see. So yeah, I do totally understand that just on a personal level. It's hit and miss with with some of my stuff. There's some stuff I can go back and watch. Some stuff I'm like, ugh, please no. But yeah, no, I'm glad that I appreciate you being open about that. That's an interesting insight. We'll transition here to, I mean, what has been the hottest ticket in the state of Michigan, and that's the Detroit Lions over these last few years. You've been right at the forefront of that. I was fortunate enough to be at the playoff games last year when. I mean, you talk about loud environments, man, and all. I got a question. I'm going to put you on the spot with a question about that at some point in the future. But let's talk about this current team because look, they're in a tremendous place record-wise. They've done something. I mean, they've won 10 games in a row, which I don't care how good you are, how consistent you are as an organization, is really difficult to do. And it's even more difficult when you look at some of the adversity they've faced, some of the injuries they've had. I guess from your standpoint, having seen this team take body blow after body blow, where are you at in regards to the concerns with the injuries? Do you feel like to a certain extent maybe fans are overdoing it with the concern, or do you think that this is something that could potentially really kind of derail the season?
I don't know if you took TJ Watt off the Steelers, if the Steelers are the same. And the fact that you
Yeah.
took a defensive player of the year candidate off the field and the defense continues to play the way that they are, there isn't a more injured team in the NFL right now. Next man up has really become who's available. And I really applaud Brad Holmes for getting on the phone and just looking for bodies. And with all the new guys that have come in, I think there's 6 or 7 this week. You want to make sure that the locker room remains the same.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's really important, and that everybody is there for the same reason, and that is to win, which I believe that they wouldn't bring anybody in if they didn't. I truly believe that. But when you look at what this team has had to go through from a depth perspective, I don't know how you don't vote for Dan Campbell to be coach of the year. Like, who else can keep this train on the tracks the way that he has with, obviously the help of Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, and you get the special teams game with Khalif Raymond in Tennessee where you only need 85 yards passing to put up 50 points. I'm still perplexed by how that happened. It's just wild to me. But I think the fans should be concerned because
Mhm.
there's a depth chart for a reason, and we've been really good and we've been very blessed to have a guy like Brad Holmes in charge where they have found really quality depth. But when you start losing guys off your too deep, now things are getting a little sketchy. I
Yeah.
mean, look at last game, Onzarike, Pascal, and now Rodrigo, who's going to be done for the year. Like Malcolm Rodriguez, the Hard Knocks darling. Then they draft a linebacker in Jack Campbell. His playing time goes way down. He's playing teams. He still, stays involved, still stays engaged. And then when his number is called this year, you don't miss a beat. Like that is because he believes in where he's at. Because a lot of other guys, look at Deontay Johnson, the wide receiver, former Toledo product. Like, you look at guys that just check out when things don't go their way. For this coaching staff to keep everybody on the ship and row in the right direction, shout out PJ Fleck. I think it's huge.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you, and I think I would be. It is concerning. You're right. I mean, especially when you're talking about second, third string guys that are going down, and guys that, in some instances like Anzalone, I trust by the playoffs, he could be back to relative full health. There's the rumors about if you get to the Super Bowl, could Hutch come back? But when you're talking about guys that are going to be out for the season, I mean, it gets it's incredibly concerning. At the same time, it's been a minute since we've had something like this in Detroit, where the faith that I have in the eye test of Brad Holmes is like staggering at this point. Like, I just get every time they lose a player or need a player, I just get this image of him like smoking a cigarette and scrolling through his phone and being like, I like that guy. Let's go get him. And it works. Like, when you look at like coming into the year, there was, the concern about wide receiver depth. They get a guy who hadn't played in 2 years, and Tim Patrick's filled that role in the slot, been great, right? Like, oh, we need a kicker. Let's get a guy who made a few long kicks in an exhibition game, and he's 18 for 19. He's kicked 2 huge game-winning field goals for you. It's like, I think their ability to plug those holes, even if it's not with stars, but just with guys that can get you by, I think is a huge reason for that. And with Campbell being coach, you're right. You could argue Campbell probably should have a Coach of the Year award already. My guess is if they make the playoffs in 22, he probably might have gotten there. But Coach of the Year and Manager of the Year, I think, are weird awards in the sense that we always give it to the most surprising team. Okay, we didn't think this team, like D'Amico Ryans, I think won it last year. Nobody expected Texans to be good. They made the playoffs. Like, there's something to be said about, one, a team that had super high expectations coming into the season, and two, has had a million different things that could have derailed their seasons at different points that just has kept going. I mean, they've kept the staff together. They've kept the players together. Really has been incredible to watch. I do want to ask about just the run they had last year through the postseason, because that was it was one of those things where you try to, and I struggle with this with the Tigers because I'm so focused every day and looking at matchups and wondering who AJ is going to put in, take out the bullpen, not even knowing who today's starter is going to be. But I really was with the Lions stuff last year, kind of able to take in the fact that this was so special for so many people. And the Rams game, I remember just thinking that was the loudest environment I'd ever been in for any sporting event, truly. As somebody who had responsibilities on game day and was working, talking to the crowd and everything. Were you kind of able to take a moment for yourself and be like, man, this is up to this point a once in a lifetime experience?
I had that very discussion with our game day on field presentation coordinator Andrew Fry, and I looked at him and I was like, are you enjoying this? Like, it's so difficult to understand the magnitude because I get to work with Lomas Brown and we talk about the 95 team all the time. And that was the last time, 93 to 95, that the team had 3 consecutive winning seasons. We're in year 3 of that right now with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. And you really can't take it for granted because every year in the NFL is so different, right? The draft, free agency, retirements, injuries. That league, one year you can be up. I mean, we saw it in the Stafford years. You can make the playoffs, and the next year you could just be like, what in the world has happened here? So I did take a moment where we discussed, like, what if this didn't happen again? Mm-hmm. What if we would have lost that game? We win against the Rams. Well, what if we get upset by the Buccaneers? Like, are we aware of where we are at right now in this golden era of Lions football? Now, luckily, we win both of those. We go to the NFC Championship game, and here come all the expectations of this season. But I try to remind people all the time on the radio, like you are living in an era that so many Lions fans, that whether they are deceased at this point or whatever the case may be, have wanted to be in for so long, where the national media is looking at you like a favorite. Like, that's crazy to me. The way that this team is talked about, on the 4-letter network and everywhere else, it's just like, man, this is really happening. And I think there's a little bit of a pinch me moment that, we've won 10 games in a row. There's not a game on the schedule where I look at and I go, oh boy, like, we got to worry about that team. Like, even the Bills coming up, like, okay, let's roll it out there and play.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so exciting for me. And Brad Holmes had talked about this, I think, at his end of season press conference last year, which is what made it so cool is it never felt to me like Cinderella fluke run. I remember when we beat the Bucks to go to the NFC Championship saying like, this kind of makes sense. There's really good players on this team. They have a good coach. They're disciplined. It didn't feel like a 1 year fluky thing. The Holmes' goal from the beginning was to achieve, a level of sustainability. And I think Detroit fans are they're always humble with this, and we've had to learn the hard way, but there are fan bases. I think Ohio State, to a certain extent, going back to Michigan, Ohio State is kind of an example of this, where the worst thing you can do is assume that this stuff lasts forever, because it doesn't. It does. No matter how dominant you are, no matter how much success you have. I mean, we went through 2 decades essentially where the Super Bowl basically ran through New England in some capacity. Like, you either they won it or you had to beat them in order to win it. And now it's like they might be, I think Drake May is going to be good, but look at what they've been the last 3-4 years. Like, that reverence, that consistency, it just goes away, and you never know. So yeah, it was incredibly special to see, and I think we're going to continue to see more of it. And the fact that just Ford Field as a facility, I wanted to ask about this, because I've always been under the impression you can't judge a arena, stadium, or ballpark until they've played really meaningful games at that particular stadium. And I felt like every time I'd been to Ford Field, I'm like, this is a really nice facility. For one, thank God it's a dome. And I know maybe that makes me a pussy, but I'm not it was 0 degrees. I was doing content with my producer in January outside of Ford Field last year. I much preferred being inside to watch the game. So I'm like, I enjoyed all of that, but I'm like, I think if this team gets really good, this could be an environment that really pops off. Even with that, were you surprised by the environment at Ford Field over the last several years, or did you think, yeah, no, this is a long time coming, this is par for the course, we were ready for this?
So my first year with the Lions was in 2011. I was selling merchandise out of a kiosk for a company called Main Gate, who had the rights to the merchandising there.
Wow.
And there we played the Chicago Bears, and it was the Motown Showdown. We had the shirts printed for it. And that was the first time I was like, okay, like, this place can get crazy. And then we go to last year's playoff games at home, and people have asked this question a lot, like, what's been the difference between last year and this year from the stadium perspective? Dude, the playoffs just carried over. It's every single game. And there was a point last year or 2 years ago, we were playing Jacksonville, and we were up big in the second half. And the fans, I contest, had no idea what to do, because we weren't sure, is the bottom going to fall out? Like, what happens next? And it's like, no, we're actually good. Like, we are destroying somebody. Mm-hmm. And now that expectation, fans are coming in, and Jared pointed to this in his press conference. They don't just show up just to watch a game. They're showing up to have an impact on the game. Our fan base, the Rust Belt, whether it's Buffalo, Cleveland, Detroit, these teams where, there's not a lot to do here in the winter, right? So we really do gravitate to our sports teams being good. And when you get a team like the Detroit Lions in the mecca of professional sports that is the National Football League, I mean, it's been insane ever since. And every single game day kind of feels like the same. It kind of feels like those playoff games all over again.
Yeah, and that trauma is so real, because one thing I've tried to say over the last several years is, if we have to live under the assumption that this is different. So if a player goes down, it's not a curse. They can bounce back. If they lose a lead, they can find a way to get it back. And I think that at every step, when we felt like, here comes, this is such a, this is old hat at this point, the same old Lions principle, they've kind of subverted those expectations. I remember in 21, when Michigan was playing Ohio State, having that same thing, where waiting for the moment where Ohio State became Ohio State, and we had to suffer through another loss like that. And it wasn't until I was getting congratulations texts, and it wasn't until that Ajabo sack where I'm like, I think we're going to win this game. This is awesome. Yeah, it's been really an incredible ride. I mean, not to put you on the spot too much, but do you think that this is going to be the last team standing?
Oh man, I tell you what, Lomas and I go back and forth, because I am traumatized, much like you are, Chris.
I get it.
Where I'm used to. I mean, and I know. And by the way, I absolutely love your Detroit Tigers content.
Oh, thank you.
I think it at some point it's got to be packaged and distributed to the masses, even to an even greater level, because you go back to the teams where we were going to win the World Series, right? And it didn't work out, and you remember what that felt like. And I am afraid to feel that way again.
I get
So
it.
I remain cautiously optimistic. I think we have the horses. I think we have the coaching staff. But the thing about, when you're not in a series, when you're in a one and done like March Madness, or when you're in a one game eliminator like the college football playoff or the NFL bracket, like, you don't have to be the best team all season. You just got to be the better team for 60 minutes on that particular day. Weird bounces happen. That's why I think the Houston game was so important, because
Right.
when everything was going sideways, they still found a way to win. And I thought Collinsworth pointing that out on the broadcast was very important too, because during the course of a playoff game, bad things are going to happen. Can you survive? Do you have experience that you can go back to and say, no, wait a minute, we've done this before, we can do this again? They're building all of the necessities to become a Super Bowl champion. And if that were to happen, the photographs of Woodward I don't know. I really don't even know how to summarize what I'm thinking. But I just imagine that street packed in the photos in like a black and white that hangs somewhere to the year 4055. And like, remember the 2024 Lions? Like, yeah, we do.
The only other sports team that I could think of where a championship would mean that much and would be that improbable to that level would be the Browns winning the Super Bowl. That's the only other one across all sports, across all cities, where the celebration would be that big. It's interesting because the team that this run has kind of reminded me of over these last few years is the mid 2010 Chicago Cubs with Theo Epstein at the helm, where everyone kept waiting during those runs. When's the moment where the Cubs become the Cubs? When's the moment where, despite everything that's going well, where things where they crumble? And it was Joe Madden throughout that season was saying, we know the history. We also know at some point things are going to go sideways. And in the last two playoff series, they were down 2-1 to the Dodgers. They were down 3-1 to Cleveland. And it's just, you realized in that moment, like, this is different. You're right. There is that scare. Like, I don't want to jump in the pool, but I guess to a certain extent, my brain has been rewired. Of the Lions, it's different, admittedly, with what Michigan did in football, because I always lived under the belief in my lifetime that as great as Michigan was going to be eventually, there would always be an LSU or a Georgia or a Bama that would like get in the way, like just the way that they did in 21 when we went to the Orange Bowl. And it was stuffing Milroe on that fourth down in the Rose Bowl where I'm like, I think we're the best team left. Like, I think that moment hopefully will come. You're right. A lot of things got to go right, but the Houston game was, I think, that's something you put on the Super Bowl DVD, because I have a hard time believing Goff's going to throw 5 interceptions again. And when he did, they still found a way to win that game. I think that was a huge moment. Quick, this is a live breaking news here, but we brought up Anthony Broom earlier. He's just reported Michigan has fired Kirk Campbell. Not shocking. Probably expected. Needed to happen. It was just one that didn't work out. I don't view it as any sort of ill will, but yeah, it was the right move. The play calling this year was suspect. The offense never really got going. The last question that I have for you, and this is the one where I'm going to put you on the spot, because you've been at the Big House when Michigan has beaten Ohio State. You've been at Ford Field when they've won playoff games. Their first playoff game in 32 years, first one ever at Ford Field. Which environment, in your mind, as somebody who's been on the field for both of these, is crazier?
I would say the Lions, because of the history there. Michigan fans have had success. There are national championships. We know what that looks like, despite who wants to debate whatever in 1997. Like, a defensive player won the Heisman. Like, go fly a kite. That's how I feel about anybody who says split national championship. Like, go look up the history of it. There's been a lot of them. When you go to look up the actual voting of things. But the Lions, because something you mentioned earlier, which is the Dome Stadium, and it's a concrete building, so the noise inside of that is it is so loud. The decibel level is insane. Where you don't get that. It can be loud at Michigan Stadium at times, but Ford Field has more of a consistency from a fan base perspective. So I would say that Ford Field was the greatest environment that I've ever been a part of. At a sports venue, for sure.
I would agree. And I was at Michigan, Ohio State last year at the Big House, and I noticed, maybe it's because Ohio and Michigan are such close proximity to each other, but there's almost throughout that game almost like a nervous tension, and that game was so close as well. It wasn't really until Rod Moore's pick where the place really started to go nuts, and that game had so many consequences. Both teams undefeated. You're coming off the sign stealing thing, whereas the Lions won. it started with the euphoria of, hey, we're here. This is actually happening. And as you said, sustained all the way through 4 quarters. Like it was strange. I remember looking at my buddy. We got there about an hour early to get in our seats, and 45 minutes ago, and people were standing up, and it was loud. I'm like, man, we got to pace ourselves here because we got 4 hours of football. We got 4 hours of football coming up. But no, obviously, incredible memories. Well, look, dude, you like everyone who decides to come on the show. You've always been good to me. I appreciate it. People, we'll link to your socials and everything, and make sure that we're promoting what you're doing with Lomas and all that stuff as well. Really appreciate it. It's been fun, it's been fun getting to know the voice and fun getting to know the guy as well. Make sure to follow Anthony Bellino on social media as well. Everyone who's listening to this, thank you for your now. I gotta come up with sub levels for it, because you were a friend of the program who just hadn't been on the show. So now there's like an added gold star on a patch on your jersey, because you've now officially been in the arena here for Chris and company. So thanks so much, man. We appreciate it, and thanks for being a part of it.
Chris, man, you do a great job. I sincerely, meant your post-game recaps are fantastic. I'm happy for you. The success, man, you can see it. It's great. It's glorious. I follow along, especially Tiger season. I got to wake up early in the morning, so I'm not staying up to watch Tigers Mariners at 10:45. People, who am I going to for the news? I'm going to Chris Castellani's who I'm going to. So thank you, man. I'm glad you were able to enjoy. I think back to this Tiger season. I thought about people like you who live and breathe with that team and what that run meant, and the job that AJ Hinch did in Tarek Skubal winning the Cy Young, and how special that was for so many people that care about the Tigers to the level that you do, man. That made me happy, and it made me happy for the team and the fans, and especially for you, my friend. So thanks for having me, bro. I appreciate it. Let's talk soon, shall we? Yeah, we'll do it again real soon. And just to add to that, it was, because there were no expectations, it was the most fun I'd ever had watching sports, where it was like, this is actually happening. And for it, one question that I'd always gotten, and this was my 8th year doing those videos, is what are you going to do when the team's good? I'm like, I don't know. It hasn't happened yet. Like, we haven't seen it. So for that run, to 5 years after making a video after 114 loss season, every game, to be able to kind of follow through on that, it was, and that's, baseball especially, man, I just make the videos to the reception by the fans and everything. Like, it was, I after we clinched the playoff spot, like I had a good cry after that, because that was really, really appreciative. And that was incredibly kind what you just said. So thank you very much, Anthony. Have a good one, dude. Appreciate you, man. Thank you. Thank you so much to Anthony for joining the program. He's great. That was incredibly kind. Some of the stuff that he said about our content there at the end. Very meaningful. And we're obviously out of season, but you guys know that I'll be itching to do some Tiger stuff here real soon, and hopefully all of you guys can be receptive to it as well. It means a lot to hear that, especially from somebody in the industry, because you never know. The people could laugh at you, they think you're crap, but you hear something like that, it does make us believe that the process is good and that we're moving in the right direction. As I said, if you want to find access to this show, you can find it on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify. And if you want to find access to everything I do, you can go to castellanicontent.com. Castellanicontent.com is where you'll find it's one-stop shop for everything that Austin and I create. Easy to use, very accessible. It's getting updated basically every day with the interviews or the videos that we are making. No word yet on who the guest will be for next week's show. We are still working on that, but to the credit of Austin, and I'll give myself a little bit of credit here as well, with the guests we've got, we've been very consistent lately. I feel like it's been a while since we've missed a week. We want to continue to kind of keep that streak going, but either way, we are working hard. We're doing the best we can, not just from a content standpoint, from a personal standpoint as well, and your support definitely means a lot. And thank you so much to Anthony for joining the program today. We will plug his social medias in the description for this video. You guys are the best. We'll be back here next week with another episode of Chris and Company. We'll be back here next Monday with another episode of I'll Say This, and the train rolls on. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Peace and happiness. Ever since we started winning, every team coming short. Every time we touch the ball, all we do is score. Man, you know the game over. We up 20 in the fourth. We the Detroit Lions and we run the fucking North.